Hey, welcome to the Bible, Connecting the Pieces. I know it's an unusual name for a course on the Bible and an unusual graphic. You can see all the pieces here. The reason we chose this graphic is because oftentimes students of the Bible quite literally gather up the Bible in pieces. Rather than starting with a big picture, either a big story or an understanding of how the structure actually fits together, they start by collecting up pieces. I did this when I started going to church as a teenager. I sat in a Sunday school class and they talked about things from a book. Maybe it was Job, maybe it was Malachi, I don't know what it was, but I had no idea what the piece was I was getting that day or what it meant. And when I went to the service, I listened to a sermon from a book called Philippians, and I didn't have any idea who Philippians were or what the piece meant. But we continue to collect up those pieces, and that's what I find with people who take this course is they come to it with lots of pieces, and the question that they have is, how in the world do all of these fit together? And that's the question we're going to try to answer together as we travel through this. Lesson 1 is we're just going to answer this question: where's the box top? What in the world does that mean? Well, picture for a second a jigsaw puzzle. Well, just a pile of pieces here. And we look at that pile and we go, I think I'll put the puzzle together. And so we pick up a piece and we look at it and we go, I don't know quite what that piece is, but we lay it down, pick up another piece, look at it. Doesn't look like that piece. We lay it down, pick up another piece and look at it. And you get the pattern. You've probably done this with a jigsaw puzzle. What's the secret to it? The secret is to having the box top lid. So if you have the lid, you know what the picture looks like. And if you know what the picture looks like, then when you pick those pieces up, you'll go, that looks like it fits in this part of the picture. And that's exactly what we want to do with the scripture today, is we want to move our way through this in such a way that we begin to understand the box top lid. So what's our purpose? Our purpose is just that, to help you create a structure of understanding for the scripture. We're going to do some interesting things, some things that aren't usually done in a survey, and what we're going to help you do, and we've done, is we're going to create a box top lid. We're going to say this is where all these pieces fit. This is why they fit there. And once you begin to become comfortable with that, then everything that you experience from there on out, everything that you hear, you're going to be finding yourself going, I know where that fits. I know what time that fits in. I know what books that relates to. I know what's going on in the context of that time. And it begins then to fit things together for you. And when it does, it just opens the scripture immensely. So basically, the purpose is to provide that foundational piece of understanding that will change the way, in a very positive and dynamic sense, of how you look at the scripture. The emphasis is going to be functional. So we're not going to go deep in anything. What we're going to do is to rely on function. My dad was a mechanic. And I remember watching him fix things. He was in the day when mechanical things were mechanical and not electronic. So you fixed a lot of stuff. And I remember admiring the parts of things that he worked on. And he said to me one time, he said, the parts are interesting, but here's the most important thing you need to know. You need to know how that part relates to the rest of them, or you'll never fix that part correctly. And that's what we're going to do here. The emphasis is going to be on function. How do these things fit together? So I'm going to use some terminology that will be different from most surveys, that will help us do that. So you're not going to find this in a lot of other places, but it's going to make sense to you, and it's going to be exciting once you get it going. So the process we're going to do is to quickly go through some content. Well, when I do this, I'm going to have someone come afterwards and say, I really loved the content, but it wasn't deep enough. So here's my disclaimer. We're not going to go deep. What we're going to do is lay down the top of that box top. And then you can take pieces that are already deep and begin to put them in that. And you can go deep and understand why you're going deep and where what you're studying fits in that. But we're going to stay up at this level of saying, what's the big structure look like? How does it fit together? What's the foundational things that we need to know? And in fact, that's what this is basically what's today called foundational knowledge. It's what you need to know before you can really operate deeply with anything. And so we're going to provide that big picture so that when you go to the specifics, you'll understand how those fit and what those mean and what those say to you. If that makes sense to you, that's the process that we're looking at. So with that, let's ask a question. What's the box top look like? And you in your notes, you have a place to do some drawing with me. So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to draw out a picture. This is difficult. This requires some talent, which I don't have. But we're just going to draw some boxes. So we're going to draw 3 boxes, kind of like this, and another 3 over on this side, like this. Hopefully yours look better than mine, but you get the feel of it. And the structure of the Bible basically fits into that diagram. Interestingly, I first caught on to this when I'd finished a grad program at a really one of the excellent Bible colleges here in the United States. And after I had finished the program and I'd become good friends with one of the profs, he asked me to go to lunch with him, and we were sitting at a table looking at each other and talking Bible. And he said, "Hey, tell me, Bert, now that you've finished all of this, do you think you could put the structure of the Bible together? Can you tell me how all the pieces fit together?" And I get a swing at it, which he said, "Well, that's pretty good, but you missed a whole bunch of it." And he took a napkin and laid it on the table, kind of like a table like we have here. And he took his pen and he drew on that napkin, and in 10 minutes, he told me how it all fit together. And it changed everything. I went, oh my goodness, this is amazing stuff. In fact, I ended up spending 20 years of my career life working with that entity that he was just beginning, teaching people how it all fit together. This isn't part of that. This really is more structural, but I guarantee you it's like a life-changing moment. It was like an aha to me. My goodness, how did I miss this? And I think you'll find the same thing. So if we take a look at this, let's just put up here Bible, because that's what we're looking at, right? And we know there are 66 what we call books in the Bible, 66. They're really letters and narratives and essays and poems and all sorts of things. We've tended to call the groupings books, so that's what we'll call them. Over here in this column, we have what we're going to call the Old Testament. And we know that there are 39 of these books in the Old Testament. And over here in the New Testament, there are 27 of them. Now, here's how we're going to organize them. We need to name these boxes, and here's how I'm going to name them. I'm going to call the first box foundational. Let's name the second one historical. And the third one instructional. Okay? Now over here, interestingly enough, we have exactly the same pattern in the New Testament. So we're going to name them the same way. Foundational, historical, and instructional. And this is functional, remember? This isn't theological. This isn't about necessarily story so much as how it fits together. Now let me show you how this works. Up here in the foundational section, we have 5 books. Basically, we have Genesis through Deuteronomy. Oftentimes called the 5 books of Moses or the Law or the Pentateuch. When we get to this section, we're going to call it Torah for a variety of reasons. But that's the foundational section. That lays down building blocks, lays down foundational things that are going to be lived out in the history. In the history, we have 12 books. And those books basically are Joshua through Esther. And in those books, what we want to watch for is how these people in this history live out that foundation. So once we're familiar with the foundation and we begin to watch this history, it takes on a whole new dynamic. When I taught seminars for Walk Through the Bible, we often had people do a little exercise. Somewhere along the way, we'd say, it'd be great if you knew all of the books of the Bible, knew the names of them all. By the way, it would be great if you did that. Please do that. So we'd have the people stand up and go, okay, we'll just say the books together, and when we come to one that you don't know, you sit down. And no matter how small or how large the audience, I'll guarantee you, 90% of the people will be down by the time we get through 1 Samuel. And what happens is this historical section loses interest really quickly if you don't know what's going on. But if you know what's going on and you understand foundational pieces, then all of a sudden you can begin to watch this history. And what happens is you begin to say to yourself, I know what's going on here. I know the piece they're dealing with there. How are they dealing with it? How are they relating to God here? Are they relating in a right way? Are they relating in a productive way? Are they relating more in a sinful way, in an unproductive way? What's going on here? And how are they living out the foundation? Is that making sense to you? It becomes powerful when you can begin to think of it that way. And that's what we're going to help you do. Now, the instructional section contains 22 books. Hopefully that all adds up right. 517, is that right? And yeah, 39. Shocking. We're good. So here we have the instructional section. Not often thought that way. It's really the poetical books. So we have in the poets, we have Job through Song of Solomon. And then it's the prophetical books, where we have Isaiah through Malachi. And those books, I know we think of them in a lot of different ways, but those books don't fit separate from this section. These books fit in this section. So what these books are doing is they're telling you things about the people and the situation that's being lived out in the history. So once you begin to know, and when we get to this piece, I'll show you how it fits. And it's really easy to understand, and when you know it, it's going to change the way you think about the scriptures in very positive and powerful ways. So the foundational piece begins to inform the history. The people who live in this history, how am I going to live here? What does God expect of me here? What are the things that I need to do here? How do I need to think here? What do I need to be careful here? What are the dangers here? And the instructional section begins to give direction and correction to those people. The poetical part generally revealing the emotions and the deep things that people have on their minds and in their hearts during that period of time. Those things that are positive, those things that aren't so positive, those things where they're hurting and they call out to God, those things when they're successful and they're rejoicing. That's how that piece works. We'll cover that piece all by itself in one of the sessions to come. And the prophetical side of it is basically, hey, you're doing great, keep it up. Hey, you're doing not so good, that's how you correct it. And they become the teachers of the time. We think of them more as future tellers, seers, but that's the least of what they do. The greatest part that they do is they teach the people about the important steps they need to follow in the history. So that's how these fit together. I'm not going to talk long about the New Testament because that's exactly how it fits together. Now we have the Gospels over here, and they lay down the foundation. Biographies of Christ's life. We have here only one historical book. That's the book of Acts. And then the rest, 22, interestingly, the rest fit into this instructional section. Only here they're letters. They're not poems so much or prophecy so much as they are very personal. They are personal letters that offer the same kind of thing. Encouraging people when they're doing well, correcting when they're not. And so that's the value. That's how it fits together. That's the box top. Oh, there's one box missing. One box missing. And that's here in the middle. Here's our dilemma. Is the historical section, which is the end of the Old Testament, ends with Ezra and Nehemiah. Malachi matches up with Nehemiah. They're contemporaries. And that section ends 400 years before the New Testament begins. So we're going to have to take a look at what we're going to call the intertestamental period, but I prefer thinking of it as the 400 silent years. These will be years by Jewish reckoning in which no prophet in the land speaks. That doesn't mean God isn't active, as you'll see when we get to that part. He's incredibly active. So think with me for a moment through this. Just real quickly, we want to just take a quick run through. Now we got three sections, right? We got foundational, historical, and instructional in the Old Testament piece with 39 books. 5 of those books are in the foundational section, which we will later refer to as the Torah. And those books lay down basics of how people and eventually a group of people, a nation, will live in following God and what their purposes will be and how they will execute and succeed in those purposes, or sadly how they might fail in those purposes. The historical piece then will build off the foundations and will show us how the people are doing. How do they do when Joshua leads them into the land? How do they do when they have a new king called Saul? How do they do after the kingdom splits? How did they do? What happens? How does the history relate to the foundations? And we'll cover a bit of that in those 12 historical books. And then the last part, we'll do 2 sessions, one on the poets and one on the prophets, and we'll begin to then see how they inform the history. What do the poets do uniquely? What do the prophetical books do uniquely? And that will basically be the foundation that we'll lay down first for the Old Testament and then very similarly for the New Testament when we get there in later sessions. So that's an exciting thing to look at. And along with that, let me just give you a quick look at a basic kind of timeline that fits into this period. And once we've done that, we're going to take a quick break and just relax a little bit. If you want to review during that break, you have a little bit of an assignment in your notes that you can take a look at. If you want to lay it down for a while and come back later, you may do that. We want to move fast, but we also want to give you a chance to reflect, and this is a good opportunity to do that. But let me just give you a quick timeline, and then we're going to take that break. I'm not going to try to attach time to creation. You know, I won't get in that argument, old earth, new earth. How many years there? I don't know. I just know that God created. And there's a story that begins there. But when we get to where the story picks up in terms of a family, with Abraham being called out of Ur to become something special in God's economy, we know that that was probably around 2000 BC. I'll use the old terminology. If you want to say BCE, that's fine with me. Whatever we use, just so we know that's where that was. When I get to Moses, I'm going to be at about 1500 BC. And when I get to David, I'm going to be at about 1000 BC. And when I get to Ezra, I'm going to be at about 500. And if we put Jesus over here, we would be somewhere between 6 and 4 BC. The oddity about the calendar is that Jesus was born before Jesus. But anyway, that's how it works out. You can see a nice even pattern. Now this isn't exact, and I don't mean for it to be exact, but here's what this will do for you. If you remember this simply, and let's say you're reading along and you're reading about Joseph toward the end of Genesis. You know that Abraham was at 2000 BC. You've now read your way through Jacob and Isaac and Jacob, and you're at Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, and toward the end of Genesis, and you know, okay, I basically must have covered 400 or closely to 500 years of history. So you begin to, in your mind's eye, without it being precise, it doesn't need to be, get a feel of how much history you're working through as you're reading through the scriptures. So when you move from Moses, who brings the people out of Egypt, and then you have the Judges period, you have Joshua and you have Judges, and you end up with a king. By the time you get to David, you've got another 500 years gone, roughly. So you begin to get a sense in your mind of a timeline, not precise, but it gives you an idea of how things are moving, which becomes absolutely crucial to building these foundational pieces that will keep you on target. So hey, we're going to take that break right now. Take a look at that assignment. Think it over, review a bit. If you're with a group, review together. And we'll be back in just a few moments and we'll continue to finish off lesson 1.